Welcome back, everyone, to Richard Likes History. Got a very exciting announcement to make today. I've had my first guest on the podcast. Very proud moment for me. And the lucky first was the wonderful South African historian, Des Latham. He's a real hero of mine. Please go and check out his many podcasts. Probably his most famous one, or his longest and most extensive one that I've listened to the most, is called The History of South Africa. Truly fantastic piece. And without further ado, let's go to my conversation that I had with Des. Just as a bit of context and an apology from me, it's the first time I've done this, and I did mess up the start of the recording. So to give you some context, the bit that got cut off was essentially just Des and I introducing each other, and then him describing to me where he lived, which is in a place called, oh, now I need to remember, Pearly Beach, of course. Pearly Beach, which sits just to the west of the southernmost point on the African continent, Cape Agulhas. Now, if you go a bit further west, you get to Cape Town, which is where I'm from. So we were just swapping stories, and you'll hear the first thing I say is that I miss the mountains of the Western Cape in South Africa, where I am now in Australia, here in Melbourne.
I really miss the just having like mountains near me, because I'm in Melbourne at the moment, which is flat as.
hmm
Have you been to Australia before?
Yes, a lot. I go every
Yeah.
year virtually. So I've been to
Oh,
Melbourne. I was
really?
there last year. Yeah, I was there last year. I go to Sydney pretty
Yeah.
much every year.
For family or
I have
for work and stuff?
yes for
Yeah.
family. Brother-in-law lives there, and my sister-in-law lives in Melbourne.
Yeah.
She's a administrator for a clinic.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, so small world, they say.
It's a very small world.
And
I
you, Richard, where are you from originally?
Cape Town, Belleville. Yeah.
CY.
See why exactly? Yeah, I left when I was 11 years old, and I'm like 26 now, so I'm sort of split in half, but I still feel more. I don't know. I still feel more South African at heart. Australia hasn't won me over completely.
You know, I run a lot. I'm a half marathon runner, and I really love it. And I
Yeah.
met this Chilean Australian.
Yeah.
He's in his 80s. He runs marathons in the Master Games. He goes for Australia to Master Games every year, which is
Yeah.
people over the age, I think, of 65. Anyway, and he said something to me a few years ago, which really resonated, which I must tell you. And I've been saying this a lot to South Africans who travel around the world and live elsewhere and move and so on. I lived in America twice, just out
Yeah.
of interest. And he said to me, I said, "Where's your hometown?"
Mm.
One day. And he said, "Sydney." So I said, "No, your hometown." He said, "Oh, my birth town. My
Yeah.
birth town is Santiago."
Yeah.
He said, "But my hometown is where I live, and that's where my home is." So I thought that was a brilliant, simple way to approach the
Yeah.
thing about where you feel your emotions lie.
Yeah.
Your emotions have to lie with your hometown. You have to
Mm.
engage yourself with where you are, or else you become disconnected and
Hmm.
confused. So his message pretty much to me was where you are is where it is, and just soak up the ambiance, breathe the
You
air,
have
get
to. Yeah.
involved with your neighbors.
Yeah.
And then you can't change your birth time. So don't fight that.
Yeah.
But you're never going to be split. If you follow that rule, I promise you, you're never
Yeah.
going to feel discombobulated, because the one thing you can't change, and the other thing you can.
Oh,
And
exactly.
the thing you can change doesn't mean that if you throw yourself into Australian life in Melbourne, which is an amazing city. I
Mm.
mean, it's just incredible that you are under scoring or or losing your South Africanness. You're not. You never
Mm.
will. But that's how. I mean, his wife, for example, can barely speak English. She speaks Spanish, but
Mm.
she's lived in Sydney since 1985.
Yeah, some people are like that. Yeah.
Anyway, I don't know if that helps,
No, it
but
does.
it's a
It's good advice.
psychological approach to things. I lived in Boston and I lived
Yeah.
in San Francisco,
How
and
long?
I've always, just a year each,
Hmm.
and I always felt that I always felt I joined the Stanford African Students Association. I was
Yeah.
the first white person to join it. And they had to interview me to say, are you sure you're African? I said, yeah, I'm born and raised. I speak African languages. My first language is Zulu. Zulu is my home language.
Oh,
really.
that's awesome.
So, and then they let me in. They said, all right, pass, stamp.
Oh.
So you always feel like you have to associate with your roots.
Did you grow up in KwaZulu-Natal then?
I did, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. In Nkweleni, in Plateau Valley, which is the river that feeds Richards Bay.
No, I
And it's
remember.
downriver from Nkandla. It's the main river that
Ah.
flows past Zuma's hometown.
Oh, yeah, in Kandla style. Yeah, I know that.
In fact, we used to go hunting up the river towards Nkandla.
Yeah.
And in the late 70s, early 80s, when I was young, my brother and I would take our rifles and go up the river, work with the Zulu kids. They would bring the dogs, we'd bring the firearms, and then we'd shoot various animals and then split the money we got from the Sangomas. 50-50. My brother and I would take 50% and the Zulu kids would take 50. And then we'd all walk to the shop, which is about 12 kilometers away, to go and buy sweets, which is like a big luxury.
Yeah, it sort of sounds like it's like a different country, Rhodesia, but I read this book by, I think his name is like Peter Godwin.
Yeah,
Mukiwa.
Crocodile Eats the Sun.
Yeah,
Mukiwa,
it's like, it's probably not completely the same, but I remember he was also like essentially grew up with, I think it's like Ndebele or one of the
Ndebele.
One of the Zimbabwean languages, and yeah, like on a more rural part of like a farm somewhere, just him and the workers, and that was the
Pretty
first
much.
language he spoke. Yeah,
It's my story too. Funny. And Afrikaans is your first language.
Ek praat Afrikaans met my ouers, but I never.
Waar is jou ouers? Is hulle
in Sydney.
Melbourne?
Listen, Sydney, yeah.
Waarom is jy in Melbourne? Waarom sit jy daar?
Well, I came here for university and then I never left. Still here, but
Story of my in-laws. They went from the UK to Sydney. He's an investment banker and she's a nurse.
Yeah.
They brought two kids they had with them, and then they went from Sydney to Melbourne and they never left. So
yeah, it happens and then, well, now I don't know what the future will hold, but now my partner of like 3 years is Spanish, so we might be in Madrid or something in the next couple of years at it.
How's your Spanish?
Oh, it's like the reading ability is good, but I still get nervous with the speaking, but I reckon I'll pick it up.
Female stuff.
Yeah.
I was learning French, which is a similar language grammar-wise, and it's quite difficult. Yeah.
It takes
okay,
a while
well,
to
let's chat. I've got quite a busy day, so
yes.
Let's fire up. It's nice to meet you, and thanks for reaching out. I mean, I'm honored to chat to you. It's always amazing when people reach out and say, let's have a chat, because it's in both our interests.
Yeah, I can't believe you replied. It was great. It was the best reply ever.
And I reply to all my emails. I've got listeners around the world, which has just been incredible. I mean, the series caught me off guard, to be honest. When I launched it,
in COVID,
it took me many years to decide to do it. And I fulminated for a whole year beforehand, going over a risk. Because I don't start podcasts without doing a lot of research, like you probably have thought about it. I see your podcast. You do a lot of research on it. So, but the whole idea of starting a series takes me sometimes years.
Oh, yeah, if you do it properly.
Yeah, and also to approach it, to look at an approach. I mean, I did a series on the border wars following the Anglo-Boer Wars, which is the first series I did, which went huge, and that shocked me. And I started it because there wasn't one. So that's my ambit for doing podcasting, really, is to look at it, something that interests us as mainly Africans, but not necessarily. And I was in the SADF during the 80s, so I have an interest in military. And anyway, the long and the short of it is that the Anglo-Boer War, and then the SADF vets contacted me, told me my military background. They gave me my force number and everything. They said, okay, you need to do something on the border wars. And I said, look, I was in combat. I was in Angola. I said, I'm not happy doing that because I was so up against the coalface, and I prefer to be able to watch something clearly. And if you're emotionally attached too much to one part of the equation, you're blind. You're pretty blind to what happened. Anyway, a long story. It took me them a year. I met with the lieutenants and stuff for a whole year. Eventually, they said, having coffee once every couple of months. They kept on at me. And eventually they said, look, if you don't tell the story, someone else will, and they're going to get it wrong. So I suddenly realized that if you have, like you, Richard, if you have the capacity to kind of broach a topic like history, which is dangerous, and then do it clear-eyed and straight. And I try and do it non-emotively or judgmentally, as you probably have noticed.
Yeah.
And there's a real response from people. So the other thing is the secret is not when you're doing something. I know people say to me, I worked in the media a lot, and I had a political editor at the Business Day who said to me, your bourgeois luxury for you is to sit on the fence as a liberal. I said, I'm no liberal. But I know I'm dispassionate. I'm trained partially as a lawyer in my head. I can think. Yeah. I can put myself in your seat. I can put myself in Malema's head and to Blanche's head. I can do that. And I can then approach the world from their point of view, and it doesn't threaten me. You know what I mean? So if you can do that, then suddenly you understand nuance. And then secondly, you don't have to judge, because who are you and me?
That's pretty rare nowadays, to be honest, to have a cold, not cold, but just to take emotion out of a lot of things. Is the world is very reactive nowadays. But
the secret phrase, Richard, is dispassionate. Dispassionate doesn't mean don't have dispassionate. It's a legal phrase, which means that you approach something with a clinical analysis, a hypothesis, a synthesis, an antithesis, hypothesis, antithesis, and synthesis. If you can approach everything like that, and still have your core honor code, which is what you think is true, then you can do just about anything when it comes to our world of ideas. Because there are some just truths that people cannot escape.
Yeah.
And 99.9% of the people who have sent me messages are of support. You'd be surprised, on all the podcasts. I've done one on Stalingrad, which I got Russian and German listeners to.
Yeah.
On the Falklands War, which I got Argentinian and British listeners to. On the Anglo-Boer War, I've got Angolans and SADF and other vets listening to it. So, and my History of South Africa podcast, I'd say virtually half the listeners are black and young.
Oh, that's great. Yeah.
I've the royal families of Lesotho, Swatini, the Zulu line, Pedi, all listening and telling me they're listening and then feeding me info and stuff. So they don't feel threatened by a guy who's in his 60s who has a strange accent like me. And I'm just expressing that to you because I think it's important in this world where there's truth and mistruth that us as historians, and I presume you are, you just look like a historian the way you approach things. Are you a trained historian?
No, definitely not. I'm just casual, but I would like to be one. I don't know how feasible it is, but yeah.
Look, I studied history to honors level, African history eventually, and was fascinated as a kid because I grew up with Zulu, Afrikaans, and English stories in my head. My grandmother was a good storyteller, and the Zulu woman who brought me up told us stories all the time. So I had this narrative voice in my head all the time from different cultures. And understanding that people have the way of viewing reality and then presenting it to you is important. It's part of the thing we do. And the real world forms itself out of truths. So truths hurt, and truths are counter to our own perception of truth. So being able to present that to myself at times, confining my own preconceptions, is as important as just telling a story. So you'll see that many of the episodes feature in multiple versions. I don't know if you noticed, if you listened enough.
Yeah.
But I'll say
this
is what they say, this is what they say. And in fact, in the oral tradition, there's 3 or 4 versions of what happened. So in the Zulu tradition, for example, there's 3 Zulu stories about what happened, let alone what the colonials think happened. Or the English or the Boers. So you feed all of that into and say, this is what they all say. And then you step back and say the ramification. And very quickly you get to a place that's probably the truth, like the kernel of reality. And in our world with so fractious conversations people are having, which is lunacy to some extent. I think we need to honor each other's voice. Especially South Africa, we're used to that. We're used to people, my friends who are all races, saying to your face. They say things to our face, which they're not used to around the world. And you'll know that from Australians. We talk about the empire background in Australia and South Africa bluntly. People say, yeah, but you whites did this. And I don't take that offense to that.
Mm.
I'm like, yeah, so sue me, you know what I mean? It's real.
Yeah.
It's true. Yes,
Yeah.
this happened. So, and then what else happened, So you don't immediately reflect back and say, and feel responsible for the world or anything like that.
No.
And in podcasting storytelling, I think it's fundamental to get that repartee with the audience. So that's happened, which was a shock from the start. When I started this 2017,
Mm-hmm.
it wasn't forecast. I thought I'd last 6 months and people would just drum me out of town.
Mm.
And because I wasn't taking a position. When I listened to other podcasts in South Africa, it was all about the struggle. It was all about post-colonial. Or it was all about right-wingers talking about how wonderful it was during apartheid. There was all these people who were like presenting their worldviews to the world instead of presenting what could have happened to the world.
Yeah.
And then not denying roles of people. So it's a messy place.
Mm-hmm.
And it still is.
It's a fun place,
So
though.
that's
very stimulating.
precisely. Yeah, I always say, people say, I read nonfiction, but fiction, but mainly nonfiction. Because I always say to people, truth is stranger than fiction.
Yeah, it's
And it just really is. It really is.
yeah.
My famous story, or my favorite story in South African history, there's two big ones that override everything, that come back to me all the time. And the one is Mkabayi, who was Shaka's aunt. And when Shaka began losing his way somewhat in the late 1820s, the women of the Zulu women really turned against him, specifically after Nandi died, his mother. And his mother's sister, Mkabayi, blamed him for it because he moved from where I grew up, in Flatuzi Valley, to Khoekhoe, which is Stanger. And she got some disease there and died. So Mkabayi, who was a mother's sister, Shaka's auntie, blamed him for it. Then there were other things going on with how he was launching attacks on everyone, and they just got tired of war. So the auntie supported Dingaan, who killed his half brother Shaka. Shaka, this one of the sons of Senzanga Khona, but not full brother, half brother. And then there was a big debate because princes who killed the king couldn't become kings. So there was a debate about what Dingaan did, because he was involved in the killing itself. But he wasn't the main murderer. He was a bit like Caesar. He was kind of standing around and he kind of jabbed once and hit him in Shaka in the arm. That's what the oral history says, which is probably true. And so there's a debate amongst the councillors, all men, all of them are men. 1828, they got together and they debated whether Shaka should be king. And Mkabayi, who was about 6 foot tall, the auntie, the woman, dressed as a man in Zulu warrior outfit, marched into the councillor hut, the big official hut, which is quite large, on pillars and stuff, and harangued the men, threatened and intimidated them, and they changed their minds and agreed that Shaka should be king. So always when people say, women, the colonial era, pre-colonial, I'm like, the Zulus are very traditional, women have no power and all that stuff. I'm like, let me tell you a story. And this is not my story. There's 3 or 4 oral versions of that in Zulu tradition. But that blows up a lot of preconceptions about the Zulu warrior, male ethos, women and their roles in Zulu society, the perception of change and how it takes place, and also the nuance involved in cultures.
Did the men know that it was a woman coming in? Was she in full disguise, or they knew?
No.
Oh, they knew.
She dressed as them. She dressed as a man to say, hey,
listen,
who around here is going to take me on? And she's quite big and quite strong. So what I'm saying is she's looked like a warrior, just happened to be a woman. No, everyone knew exactly who she was.
Okay. Well, that makes
she
it
dressed
better.
up as the counselor. Exactly. She kind of marched in, took control, and there was a lot of vacillation. After she spoke, they all agreed he should be king. Right. So that's the one story that, in the terms of South African and world history nuance, it blows up the male macho warrior tradition. We have the old male counselor sitting in his. You can think about the Mongols or Rome or the Russians or the British Empire. You can think of any empire and then extrapolate based on the preconceptions. So it's things like that in history that you cannot make that stuff up.
No, it sounds
If
like
I'd
it literally sounds like
make that,
it's a yeah. If a script writer wrote that, you would be like, no one's going to believe this.
that's the point of what I'm saying here with the podcasting thing is that the history parts of the world have always for me been fascinating because they blow up. If you only read one point of view, you're not going to get that power. You're not going to get that understanding that it really does alter cognition. And if you alter cognition, you're sharpening your perceptions. I mean, sharpening your perceptions, the knowledge is flowing through those new cuts in your brain that you've allowed. You've broken open the eggshell that is surrounding reality, and you're allowing these other things in. And if you're not threatened by those things, it empowers you massively.
Yeah, that's exactly how I feel. Yeah,
I'm pleased because a lot of people in our world, Richard, they think that there's there's hidden meaning in what we do. And I've said to everyone who's asked me this, that there is a hidden meaning in what I do. All I ask for is that people approach our history from a different point of view.
Yeah.
And it's worked so far, and it's really challenged, and it takes a lot of hard yards, as you know.
What's the listener numbers at the moment for like South Africans?
It's 3 million, approaching 3 million.
Wow.
Oh, South Africans?
Yeah, do you know?
75% of that. So I haven't looked.
That's still more
specific
in the millions.
Yes, no. Well, it's my total number is 5 million for my podcast. So they've. If you told me this in 2017 when I started, I would have laughed at you. Old white guy does podcast on history, or military history, which is even more weird. I mean, the border wars has just gone past 1 million listens. I stopped it more than 3 years ago. But the long tail of the internet, as long as you keep hosting and the costs of hosting go up and up and up, people find it. So that's been fascinating. And the Anglo-Boer War is approaching 1 million as well. So there's a real need there for people to listen to this kind of stuff. The Stalingrad is 250,000 listens, for example, from a South African with a weird accent doing someone else's history. So, I mean, this is not idle boasting. This is just recognition that the thing we're talking about here, you don't wake up one morning and say, okay, let's do this as a nice to have. I do training with podcasters, and I always warn them that you've got to have 24 episodes before you start thinking about where you are in the world. That's one a week for 6 months.
Yeah.
After that, then you can start reconciling yourself again about a few things. How many audiences? What do I do? After the 24, the 6-month period is the uptake starts taking place. Yeah. So a lot of people give up after 3, some after 1. But because I realize how difficult it is to make sound work. And the process of uploading in podcasting is quite difficult compared to YouTube. YouTube, you just upload and you wave goodbye. Put in demographic tags, description. Audio podcasting for hosting and distribution is much more technical in the background. So they give up.
No, it's a shame. There are still lots of people doing it though, which is good. If I can come back to I remember one of my favorite stories when I listened to the History of South Africa one, which I haven't finished, by the way. Are you still releasing that one every
week until probably I'm in 276 to 177 now. So and I'm in 1881.
Okay.
So another 200 or 300 episodes, I think.
Yeah. The Coenraad de Buys whole story arc was just the weirdest thing ever for me. I love that. I like it.
Remember I said to you the 2 stories that for me will break everyone's minds about preconceptions. The one is Mkabayi, the other one is Coenraad.
Oh, okay, good. I had a feeling it might be. Well, then you can go and tell that one then.
Well, Coenraad de Buys in the 1750s, 55, he was an orphaned at a young age, and his in-laws and his family took over the farm that he was allocated. And then they forced him to work as a Khoekhoe laborer. They kind of made him sleep in the shed. They treated him as not a member of the family. They basically stole his land. And that embittered him to the Dutch and the Boer way. And he realized that, and he basically got enough together to get a wagon and some draft oxen and a horse or two. And then he trundled off towards the Eastern Cape, which we know now as the Eastern Cape. It's called the Zuurveld then, Sauerveld. And very quickly he took up with the Khoekhoe and then Hlambe, which are the two groups of Xhosa. And he could speak Xhosa very early. He learned to speak it quite quickly. So he was highly fluent in Xhosa and Dutch, and he spoke English, a smattering of English. So the Xhosa queen, Yesi, who was about 6'6" tall, and he was 7'2" tall. So he was a giant. Even now he'd be regarded as extremely large. And he was built like a tree, apparently. And she was built like also a large, imposing individual, very much like in Mkabayi's story. She and he started a relationship, sexual relationship, and they got married. And she used him as a sounding board to what is going on with a threat approaching from the Dutch over the veld. And he used her as a way to survive in the veld itself. So they both were kind of using each other. And as the VOC and the Dutch farmers began expanding, he was very important to the Xhosa. He was their main translator, and he was also a diplomatic representative at times. Because of internal fighting between the Hlambe and the Khoekhoe, he eventually, and yes, he passed away, he left the area. And then ended up in the Transorangia, which is you cross the Orange in what was then before Griqualand, Namaqualand, that area, and across from Namaqualand, Northern Cape. And each time he would marry into the society, so he had about 8 Khoi wives, mainly after that. And he ended up at the Waterberg, which is near Zimbabwe. And he had by then a clan of 200 to 300. His family, his descendants, all moving together and living together. They're still there, by the way, in the Waterberg. And
that's crazy.
It's a story that disappeared during apartheid because the national government didn't want to talk about blacks and whites cohabiting, right, at all. It was like a no-no, and yet he kind of was like very much a frontiersman. He was very true to his Boer background, even though he had been embittered by it. He didn't like the English at all, and he regarded them as a threat to his way of life. But he was a true renegade frontiersman of the era. If you'd taken him and put him into the US, he would have fitted in like hand in glove. Or taken him and put him into Australia, or Canada, any of the European-based frontiersmen who were exploring the First Nations worlds that had existed. He would feel happy there, and because of his approach to life, he was quite happy using relationships, social relationships. He didn't see people as Xhosa, he saw them as fellow human beings who he could work with. He understood culture. He set up his main house in Yesi's area as like a chieftain. He was set up as a chieftain in the thinking, the consciousness of the Xhosa. The interesting thing is they kind of thought of him as Khoe in a way, because like the Khoe and the Xhosa had hundreds of years of integration, but they all came across the land. They walked in, and they all had pastoralism as the basis. I mean, Coenraad de Buys was a pastoralist. He didn't plant fields. He was sheep, goats, cows. That was his game. Like the Khoe. That's what the Khoe did. That's what the Xhosa did. Sheep, cows, chickens, dogs. That's what they had. All of them. When the British arrived, they came by ship. And that Xhosa saw the British as different people to the Boers, to the Dutch. So it's really complex thing I'm talking about here, because later on it became white-black. But through the 1700s, early 1800s, much more diffuse concept of what was going on in Southern Africa. And it's really important to stress this, because in some strange ways, we've come all the way back to it now. We have the Springbok rugby team is a mixture of whoever's best in the position. There was a lot of period of time in the early aughts where people were saying that black and colored people playing in this, and even Indian South Africans now playing in the box for just tokens. It's not like that anymore.
Oh, not at all.
No, I mean, a New Zealand rugby supporter said to me years ago, once black South Africans start playing rugby, we are doomed. He said to me, because you've got 60 million people there.
Yeah.
And if the majority of them start playing the sport, we're done for,
Yeah.
which is what's happened in the last couple of years. I'm not saying that it'll change, it'll stay like that, but I'm just pointing out the obvious, bleeding obvious here, which is that once we got over, and I'm not talking politically here. It's just a history logic that it's pure demography truth that you live in an area called Southern Africa, and then so you had the situation where Coenraad de Buys was actually leading the way in terms of future politics. He was saying, this is who I can do deals with. He had his enemy, which is the English, not because they were white, but because they were English. And he had his allies with Khoisan, not because they're black, but because they were his allies, not his enemies.
Fellow pastoralists as well.
Yeah, and then he, of course, because he was armed and dangerous, when he arrived in the areas, he changed the politics of the region, very much like Shaka did later. So when he ended up in the Waterberg district, he changed the Venda and the Pedi politics significantly there. And he died eventually hunting elephants.
What year was that?
That was 1820s.
Oh, okay.
No one's really sure exactly what year.
So he dies and then Shaka
long
gets
life.
crowned, essentially, like not long after.
Well, Shaka was actually crowned before him.
Oh, before. Okay.
And there was no direct connection between them.
Yeah.
He never met Shaka. I mean, he went up to the Transorangia, then he went to the Transvaal area. He knew Mzilikatsi, for example, of the Ndebele, who had arrived there because of Shaka, and then he passed on to the Waterberg because it was an open area, and he was a hunter, so he would sell elephant tusks and hippo hide and stuff. Part of his living was made from hunting, and that's how he died, heading off between the Waterberg and the big trade network is Waterberg Delagoa Bay, which is Maputo, which is still a direct place for people to go, and Southern Africans go from the Mpumalanga. They have holidays in southern Mozambique, more than they have, many of them, than they have in Durban, for example.
Oh, yeah.
So, because of geography. So he was one of those who he had hundreds of grandchildren and descendants who are still living in the Waterberg district. They're now all black. You know, if you look at skin tone, they know the history of the bases. They called themselves colored during apartheid. The apartheid government didn't quite know what to do with them because of what I'm talking about here. Because they're clearly people involved in the area of northern Transvaal, as it was known then, would know that there was this history. So they kind of left them alone because they were like their own empire, if you like. So that's one of the amazing stories that no one believes is true until they go look at it. And then when they do see the facts around Coenraad de Buys, they start questioning things about ourselves. Hold on, if de Buys was doing this, what are my ancestors up to?
Yeah, because we always think, I don't know, I still have the conception, I think, that like this was a bit of an outlier, and that a lot of the like Dutch and the French Huguenots and stuff who came over, I'm Huguenot origin, I think, from my dad's side, were like very insular and like stayed near their little homestead and essentially had like a little nuclear world and didn't really branch out. But maybe, I don't know, maybe that's completely wrong. Maybe there were more.
It's wrong to some extent. It's right when you talk about the Swellendam, Stellenbosch, Franschhoek area, which is the Huguenots' Franschhoek area.
Yeah.
When they arrived, there were 150 or 180 families. They were insular because they were religiously insular. They weren't necessarily insular just about. They didn't think of things in those days like we do now in certain ways. So they had been, as you know the story from France, they'd been oppressed, murdered in thousands in France by the Catholics, and so fled to a Protestant haven, which happened to be, at that stage, the Dutch-run area of the Cape. And the Dutch were allies in the wars in France of the Protestants. So, and so the British, the English at the time. So they arrived, and so they set themselves up as specialists, and they had high skills in winemaking and wagon and carpentry and things, as you probably know better than I do. And so there was the insular process based on the fact they were townsfolk mainly. The frontiers folk, the trekkers, the trek Boers were very different from the Voortrekkers and very different from the Boers, and very different. So the trek Boers were a clan unto themselves. They married Khoe and Khoisan. They had, they were accepted in the Khoe society as captains. They were regarded, when they trekked out into Makwaland or into the Zuurveld in the mid to late 1700s, they were accepted as Khoe, and they had to fit in because there were so few of them traveling. So they are totally different from the people who stayed at home in Franschhoek. Just because they spoke Dutch and just because they looked European doesn't mean they were the same. They were totally different people. The Franschhoek and the Stellenbosch group of Dutch who emerged from then onwards were very cultured in comparison and regarded the trek Boers as savages, really, and backwards, like hillbillies. And the trek Boers were very proud of the fact that they were Africans. So later, in the 1790s to the early 1800s, and the British arrived, the British actually brought apartheid into South Africa far more firmly than those trek Boers had in their minds, because they set up towns and they were trying to create residential settlements of what they called civilizing factors. And they said the blacks were humans, but they were lower rung and they were evolving. And so they reinforced the message of us and them in these city environments. And then the missionaries also reinforced that message. And that changed the relationship that the trek Boers had with the people around them in the early 1800s. So there was a period from the 1600s to the early 1800s where South African history is quite different to what we're aware of past that. And it's a fluidity change. Things were not strictured. So as with the trek Boers intermarrying, they did so because there were no white women. So they married women, and also they were in relationships that made sense politically. They needed the allies in the area, which were the Khoe, so they married into the Khoe. In the same way that the First Peoples and some of the Canadians, especially French Canadians, married into First Peoples when they arrived in the 1600s in Canada, for example. But very different to the Australians, who when they arrived to the First Peoples of Australia, they didn't intermarry. Because they were British. They brought in this concept of being holier than thou. You know, the pre-industrial revolution had kicked off. The concept of evolution meant that everyone was kind of in a chain of order, and they were almost at the very top. That's how they viewed themselves. English civilization was the apex of Greco-Roman democracy, and these guys, they don't have steam engines. They don't have steam engines like us, and they can't read the Bible, and we're very complex people, and these people just smack stones around, and who are they? And so they form this us and them and dichotomy on the veldt, and harm irreparably the relationship we had, inter-race relations, if you like, or inter-ethnic relations. And from then, the story just firms up to this day, where the intrinsic artificiality of a European-based consciousness inside a Southern African entity, which had a much more fluid basis of recognition of identity, including the trek Boers and the Khoe, created the next phases and epochs of history. So I've been contacted a lot by Afrikaners who said thank you.
Oh, really? Okay.
No, seriously.
Yeah.
Around Ceres, for example, there's a family who contacted me to say that they sent me a picture of the mother of the family, and she's this most beautiful woman, incredibly striking, but she looks Southeast Asian. And they sent me a picture to say, here's our mother, and I'm like, well, this is striking. And they said, yeah. After listening to a series of my podcasts, they went off and did a DNA test. They discovered that they actually related. They are descended from slaves from India.
Yeah, wow.
And they're the Van Sales of Ceres. Famous big family who own wine farms.
Yeah, my parents probably know that. Huh?
And what they said to me, like, shook me to my knees. I was like, you can't undo, when you find out a DNA test, you can't undo it. It's pretty certain. And they said to me, thank you, because we're now going on holiday to Mumbai, which is the area from which
Oh,
the
cool.
ancestry is.
Yeah.
And we feel so connected to the whole world. We know we're connected to South African history. It's in our blood. And they were proud.
That's very cool.
They were proud
Yeah.
because I think the fundamental thing I'm trying to say is I've lived a life where people have always talked about Hoya Raim, purity of race. And, if you want to die as a human young, you marry your cousins.
Yeah.
You eventually you end up with a cleft palate.
Yeah, the Habsburg.
And squint for life. Yeah, the squint for life, and an IQ of 12, and you have blood diseases and disorders, and your whole line of life succumbs to self-imposed perfection, which is it's a falsity. So I'm speaking to the converted, I hope. But if you want to argue with me, I don't mind. The reality is, no, but people find this a shock.
Yeah.
I have a friend, call him an associate more, but I worked with him as a journalist during the struggle period in the 80s. And he was an Africanist. And he used to say to me, white man, go home, like semi-jokingly, but also there was a hint of Pan-Africanism, us blacks and you whites and all that. So he had a DNA test and discovered that his ancestry is Southern Italian.
Yeah, that's funny.
And he said this to everyone at a meeting, and I was stunned because he's a lovely man. He's not an idiot at all, and you can sort of have a long conversation with him. And he's not violent or aggressive. It's just very, he's got a huge sense of humor. And he was self-deprecating at that moment. He said, "Look, I've had this perception about me, and it's not entirely true. Apparently, my ancestors partly was from southern Italy." And he traveled to southern Italy. But the irony is, if you look at him and you strip away the color of skin, he suddenly looks Italian. His features.
Yeah.
And this is what the Fonseils of Ceres were saying to me. Their mother, who's Afrikaans and steeped in the traditions of Afrikaans culture and proud of her past, discovers that she is of somewhere else as well. So you can be like the story I was telling you about Aoun Abdon, the Chilean from Sydney. You can be of many places. And not be afraid of that. I think that's the main ethos, is to say that when platinum is worked into turbines for the engines of airplanes, you cannot just make the fan blade out of platinum. It will snap. You have to make an alloy out of it. And humans are like that. Our strength lies in the fact that we in South Africa have been able to overcome these difficult times. And we can create that strength of our own cultures here, because we are the oldest people in the world. The San around us in the north, in the Kalahari, are the oldest people on the planet. So we have these lines of ethnicities through us, and we're very lucky. I always said we're actually very lucky, because we take offense and immediate difference with people around us. But the power that lives within us is our geography, our place in the world with the two oceans, and the unusual topography, how South Africa rises from the coast quite swiftly, so malaria was absent in most parts of the country, which allowed...
I never realized that, yeah.
Yeah, which allowed the colonials to expand, which created South Africa as one of the few places in Africa where colonials stayed, apart from Kenya, which is again another country with highlands, where malaria does not exist around the highlands of Nairobi. That's why they ended up farming there. And so you have this fortune of topography, this luck. And South Africa had a further luck, which is we are a conduit point for the world's shipping. And have always been halfway between the East and the West with the spice trade. So we can all be fortunate that our ancestors, of whatever type, walked over the countryside. They came from Central Africa as the Bantu and Nguni, or they shipped in from Europe and then walked over the countryside like your ancestors and and part of mine. And over hundreds and hundreds of years, 500 years almost, our people have mixed together here since the 1400s with the
Yeah, it's a long time.
Portuguese marooned. It's a long time.
Yeah.
And what is a long time is the other message, is in terms of world history.
Yeah, you compare that to like, it just always fascinates me, like the Australian continent, how long people have been here. I don't know exactly what the consensus is on the
70,000
dates now.
years.
It's a long, yeah, it's just crazy. And then you're like, oh, 500 years versus that is like nothing.
Exactly. And then I live
Yeah.
near a place called Khoekhoe Cave,
Yeah.
where it's got 80,000 years of the longest period of continued habitation. It goes back to the time when the sea was actually 30 kilometers away from where
Oh,
the
yeah.
cave is now, during the ice age, the mini
Is
ice
that
age of
Classie's River Cave or a
no,
different one? Okay.
Classies is closer to Nice now.
Yeah.
No, this is called Khoekhoe. It's
Khoekhoe,
near
okay.
De Kelder. It's south of Hermanus.
Yeah.
It's I go there. I've been there a couple of times. It's quite eerie when you go there because it's quite a big cave system, and it's very scenic. But it's 80,000 years people living in this cave. You know, and in parts of the Drakensberg, 100,000 years people living in caves, and some of the oldest art in the world is on our rocks in Southern Africa, and you know, the Khoe and the San language, the clicks.
Mm-hmm.
The clicks language work the human physiology of the face and throat the most. So everyone knows
Makes
that
sense,
was the
yeah.
original language. So we can, if you learn it, you can speak any click, but it's the most difficult thing to do because it's a combination of blasts of air in your mouth and your throat. It works the facial muscles and the throat muscles the most. The language I'm talking to you now is lazy compared to what that is.
I've heard that before, yeah, that we started from the most complicated almost, and then
yes. So the San and the Khoe speak the most complicated language. We've just simplified it over hundreds of years. I mean, hundreds of thousands of years.
Yeah. I wonder if Neanderthals had a click as well when they spoke. Never thought about that. There's I remember another story from, and again, let me know if you need to go at any point. The story of like the Portuguese getting marooned and the Khoe driving them off. Well, I think there was one where like I think a Portuguese ship wanted to like get some slaves from Southern Africa, and then they got scared
Almeida.
off by like some
1480s.
Yeah, some Khoe warbands who could
Admiral.
whistle and stuff and set the cows on them.
Yeah, that's another of my favorite stories because it's so unusual, and also it formed an idea about what to do and what not to do in the South African waters early. And those are the 1480s.
Okay, yeah.
I can't remember the exact date, 1486 perhaps. So although Almeida was famous, he was the most famous admiral in the world at that time. And he was part of the royal family, Portuguese royal family. And he defeated the Ottomans, the Persians, pre-Ottomans, the Persians in battles on the, basically just west of India, approaching where the Straits of Hormuz are now, where he defeated the Sufis. He defeated them in multiple battles then.
And that's when the first Portuguese garrisons and ports and castles in the Persian Gulf. Okay, I never knew that. Yeah.
Right. So he was directly linked to that. So he was world famous as the world went at that time. On the way back to Portugal, he stopped in to pick up some water, and then he decided to seize. He would try to seize. What the Portuguese would do largely is seize children, and then enslave them, and the Dutch did that too, and the British. So especially in Africa and in Asia, and of course Madagascar and the islands of Mauritius, for example. But so they would go after the indigenous people and try and enslave them some way or another. It was the way of the world at the time. So the Khoekhoe and the Peninsula people who lived there did not slave. It was not anathema to them. None of the South African, the tradition of South Africa was direct slaving, it would be indirect. So, for example, in terms of the Khoekhoe captains would defeat other Khoe, and then they would use those people, but they weren't really slaves in the way that we'd understand. They could kind of be co-opted.
Yeah.
And eventually end up as part of the clan. Same with the Xhosa. The Xhosa would use San as like rainmakers. They regarded them as mischief little imps because they were so connected to the world of Africa. The San knew everything about everything. The Xhosa used them as mystics and mysterious people. They'd live with the Xhosa, but they weren't enslaved in that sense. But they were kind of vassals in a way. But there was no selling of slaves among Southern African chiefs. Nguni and the thing. It's one of the big truths about South Africa, which shocks people.
Yeah.
And there was no slaving amongst the Khoe and the San to each other. So it was anathema. So the Portuguese and Almeida tried to negotiate a barter deal for slaves, and these guys just laughed them off. We don't do that. And they couldn't speak each other's language, but they got the picture. Anyway, they tried Almeida landed with 50 men to try and seize slaves. And the Khoe had this capacity to talk to their cattle using various whistles. They could line them up, they could make them walk, they could stop them. They did all kinds of tricks with whistles. So the Khoe lined up the cattle with whistles, and they were fully armed, the Khoe, with their spears and charged. Remember, the Khoe had copper-tipped spears. They used to trade copper and brass or copper in particular, with the Tswana, who could smelt copper of Northern Cape. Yeah. So another myth about South African tradition is we're not like the first peoples in America who could not smelt. They just used bone and rock. Same with the Aborigines. They used bone and rock. The South Africans were Iron Age. They smelted their own iron weapons and hoes. So they would, the combination of burnt sharpened sticks and adzes made of stone and proper spears. They then ran behind cattle with these long horns, who charged the Portuguese, the Almeida and his 50 men, who were now just off the surf line, shooting at them. Pulverized the first line. A couple of the cattle went down a shot. Most of them ran over these Portuguese. Many of them died in that initial stampede. And then, of course, the Khoe were running behind them. It was like the tanks of the Germans.
Literally.
They were run over. All were killed. There were a handful left alive who ran into the water, and the Khoe didn't want to follow them in. And they almost drowned because they were wearing heavy armor, the Portuguese. 50 dead. 50 died. And including Almeida, the world's most famous admiral.
Oh, he died there too.
He died. He was killed on the beach. So this world's most famous admiral who took out the Sufis, and took out the Persian Empire, died with these guys with cattle. They thought of them as savages. He died, being killed technically by savages. The shock of that moment, I cannot overestimate what happened. From the 1480s onwards, through until the British arrived, they knew not to mess with the Khoe when it came to trying to collect. A number of people made the mistake of trying to do that over the next 200 years, and they paid the price normally for doing that. So I found that a fascinating tale about people of our backyard. The descendants of the Khoe, the colored South Africans, and their capacity it's in the cultural element of South Africans to have combat in our souls. And it's not just, it comes from a combination of our ethnicities. We are combat ridden. I always warn people about South Africa. We grew out of blood, really. We are people who fight first and ask questions later. All cultures.
It is,
and you may laugh. It is, and people disabuse us as being savage and violent, but the other side of the tale is the message to slavers from then on was, don't mess with us. And they didn't. Two reasons, as I've said. The one is the culture was not to slave amongst black and Khoe, and the second reason was they got the message that if you try, you will pay the ultimate price. So from then on, they would do deals with the Khoe, now and again try and raid their cattle, be driven away. There was never true in the terms master-servant relationship, which later changed when the Dutch set up with Van Riebeeck in 1652. That relationship changed. That was 200 years later.
That was a long time.
Virtually. Exactly. That relationship then changed because of all sorts of interrelationship developments in the Cape. So that meant that the Khoe systems broke down quite fast because they were so disparate. They had so many captains in charge of like small clans. They weren't as cohesive as the Xhosa or the Zulu, the Tswana. The Khoekhoe were more fractured because of their tradition of pastoralism and how they'd operated on the African landscape for thousands of years. So the Dutch broke them up quite quickly. And the trick was, so it's a long tale, but the message I think is of De Almeida in particular and of the slave trade. It then started north of Namibia, really. In northern Namibia was the closest slave trading, and Delagoa Bay.
On Mozambique, yeah.
Yeah, and that was about the two entrepreneurs of slaving, far away from Southern Africa. There was an effect of slavery on South Africa through the secondary trade routes, but some historians, I think, have overstated the effect. There was an effect, but there was much more an effect of gold. Africans were trading gold, a lot of gold, for a long time, especially with the east coast, Sofala, which is northern Mozambique, and Delagoa Bay, but mainly Sofala. A huge amount of gold went out there from Zimbabwe and parts of South Africa. Ivory, hides, and iron. Of course, the South African groups, the Tswana in particular, were working iron
exporters
for
of
hundreds
iron.
of years.
Yeah.
They were exporters of iron. They would make ingots or flat sheets, and then they'd trade them with Arab traders who'd come up the river. So they're trading iron, exporting iron, as we still do.
Yeah. Because when was Great Zimbabwe? That was like around
1300s.
Oh, 1300s. Okay. And I remember you saying at that time there were already networks between like across the Indian Ocean essentially of trade with Great Zimbabwe and like I don't know places like the subcontinent, Arabia and stuff.
It starts well before 1000 AD.
Yeah, it's crazy. Literally,
well before 1000 AD.
Yeah, things are not things that people know about.
No, it's not, and it's fascinating too if you think about the how long it continued for and what kind of goods, because we pretty much replicate that system to this day.
Yeah.
You've got copper going out of Zambia, for example, as being wheeled out into the ports of East and Southern Africa. You've got the ships that the caravels that the Portuguese used were actually copies of the dhow. The dhow is a vessel that, it was. If you look at the sail and the setup of a caravel, if you look at the shape and the dhow, you'll see what I'm saying. They use the cantilever sail, which is not a full sail. It is on a single mast, and what it allows you to do is sail into the wind.
I've heard this. Yeah.
One of the most so what they do is they'd hug the coast, and the first ships that the Portuguese sent hugged the coast around Africa. Dias, for example, changed later. They would go across to Brazil and then across because they realized that the winds work differently. But that was a little later. The first hugged the coast, like the Indian and the Arabian sailors hugged the coast all the way down to where Delagoa Bay is. There's no proof that they went further than that because of how winds work. If you know South African wind systems, wind patterns. Thousands of years. I mean, at least pre 1000, from about 550 to 780, they've found glass beads in KwaZulu-Natal, near the Tugela. Glass beads that go back to about 550 AD. That were traded into that part of the KZN digs in the upper waters of the Tugela. And parts of Tugela that they found go back to 550 AD, and those glass beads came from India.
Yeah, it doesn't surprise me because, I read a book recently it was called The Golden Road, and it's like essentially saying how I never knew just a fact as simple as like that the Romans would spend most of their like hard coin on buying pepper from India. Like I had no idea that was so there's apparently they found all these chests of like Roman coins in India on like the Malabar coast, which is so if that's happening, I'm sure there's ships going like down to Mozambique. Like I would not.
The old myth. is that people in the areas that we're talking about didn't move around much. It's the opposite. The small towns of Europe, perhaps the people in there didn't move around much, but in southern Africa, people were pretty mobile.
Yeah.
We're talking about hundreds of kilometers. Sometimes they'd move up and down. The Khoisan would move up and down from the coastal or the flats up into the mountains at different times of the year. The Khoe would do the same. The Khoe would move hundreds of kilometers, sometimes taking advantage of the summer and the winter.
The Khoi are younger than the San have been around for longer, right? And then
the San, there's a debate about this, but the San 70,000, 80,000 years and further, and the Khoi 2,400 years ago, roughly, they arrived in South Africa from Botswana region. Coming down from Central Africa, and pre to that, there's relationships with people with cliques in around Tanzania, for example. There's links to there, but there's technically from Central Africa, and there were two strands. One went on the western seaboard through Angolan region, the other came through Botswana, but very much based on a change in the climate. The climate was changing 2,400 years ago, and drying out slightly. So the tsetse flower belts began to drop away. And of course, using the highlands, which again, the landscape of South Africa, they're very important to see the highlands. The Khoe, being pastoralists, needed no tsetse flies for themselves and also the cattle and sheep. And so they took advantage of the drying desiccation and moved into the Cape.
That's fascinating.
We need to stop. It's 10 o'clock.
We need to stop, yeah. Because, I mean, it's just funny that it's often said like Khoisan as one entity, but it's like 70,000 years and then like another group joining right at the arse end of it.
Well, that's because the Khoe and the San look the same in a way because they both have yellowish skin, which is different from the Bantu, different from the Europeans. So they are a different group of people. But the San are very different to the Khoe. And in fact, the Khoe didn't call themselves Khoe. Obviously, neither did the San. It was just a name assigned to them. The Khoisan obviously does not exist because it's a conglomeration. And because of how the Khoe and the San related, sometimes they fought each other on the mountains, and before the Europeans arrived, and other times they integrated in various ways. So there's kind of complex harmonization of things and disharmony there. But the Khoe means people of people. Or men of men, Khoekhoe. So they were called that because they called some of the groups mentioned that word, and then they became known as the Khoe. The first name for the Khoe was a slur, was Hottentot. So because of the sound of what they call themselves, it's the sound of the sound. So the Hottentot came out as like a slur almost of the name, and that now is an insult. We don't use that phrase at all. So I always look at the Khoisan movement. I have followed them and I've been to their meetings. First People's Khoisan. They call themselves the Khoisan now. So they've, in the tradition of those who've been oppressed or have an identity of oppression, they take the reference of themselves used, and then they take hold of it and seize it and use it. It's an old human thing, is to say, you want to call me Khoisan? I'm going to be the Khoisan then. And this is what we think as a Khoisan, even though this is, 500 years ago, this is not what we called ourselves. So it's an interesting historical fact. But I need to end now. I'm sorry.
No, all good.
Such a nice chat.
Yeah, it was lovely.